the topic that we have, and that I'm going to talk about how alienated children display their feelings, their very strong feelings, through their artwork. And I want to explain in the beginning why we're doing this. You know, some people don't like the idea of parental alienation. They criticize it. They even deny, some people even deny that it happens. And we need a way to kind of prove that these children have thoughts and feelings and behaviors that are really out of line. We need kind of a window into their way of thinking to understand what they're thinking and why they behave the way they do. And so there are several ways to do that. There are several ways to kind of prove that parental alienation exists. And one way, of course, is simply to examine their behaviors. And, you know, there are 8 typical behaviors that alienated children display, and we can study those. Another is to interview the children, sit down and have conversations with the children and see if they can explain to us how they're feeling and why they behave the way they do. Or another way that I want to explore here is artwork and writings that these children produce. And in some cases, the artwork comes from interviews, but most of them it isn't. Most of the artwork we're going to look at is simply done spontaneously by children on their own initiative. And so that makes it even more interesting that these are comments that the children are expressing without being asked questions by a parent or by a therapist. So I know that some of the people who are watching this webinar actually sent me some of these pictures, which I really appreciate. It's been a great help to me to collect artwork made by children and who are alienated, and with different levels. Some of them are, I guess I would call mild or moderate, or some of them are severely alienated children. So I really appreciate the help that people have sent to me. And I haven't been able to really use everything that's been sent to me, but I use a lot of the material. So I will mention, if you sent me some material, and I give little short descriptions of some of them. If I make a mistake, you know, send me a note, and I'll try to fix it. So what we're going to do in this this meeting right now is I'm going to show you a PowerPoint with a number of drawings made by children in different circumstances. And let's see if we can do this. There we go. So you should be able to see a PowerPoint screen, and you should be able to see me a little bit. Excuse me. And so this is our topic: alienated children express their feelings through artwork. And we're going to start with something that actually goes back a number of years. And there have been lots of discussion in the literature, the psychology literature, and the therapy literature, and the child development literature about children's drawings. And there have been some books on this topic. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. In other words, what I'm trying to explain here is that I didn't invent this idea of looking at children's drawings to try to understand what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And here's a book from a long time ago, from 40 years ago, that discusses children's artwork and figure drawings. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples from this book, because I want you to understand that what I'm doing now is really based on the work that many people have done over many, many years. So in this book called Children Draw and Tell, the authors, one of the things the authors did was ask the children to do family drawings. And the instructions to the child, and this of course is in the office of the psychologist, they were instructed to draw a picture of their whole family and of their family doing something. So here's a mom and a dad and 2 children, and the authors would interpret these drawings And I'm going to show you how their interpretation of this. And you can see what you think. So the name of this drawing was "You're My Hero, Dad." And then you can see how, they look at very specific things. In the picture, the child is placed next to his father, that his father's name is in double lettering, indicating that the dad is important to the boy whose name is Sean. The sister is drawn with a frown, and maybe that's a little bit of sibling rivalry. I'll go back and show you the picture again. So you can see the dad, his name is, there's an A in double lines, and then Sean is next to him, and so on. Well, those are very specific interpretations, and I can tell you that when I show you some pictures, I'm not going to try to make very, very nuanced interpretations like that, but because I think what I'm going to show you, the interpretations are pretty blatant. They're not subtle, like who's standing next to whom and so on. But anyway, this is an interesting example of how this idea of interpreting children's drawings has been around for a long time. So here I'm going to show you one more of these from this book. In this one, the boy who drew the picture is Mark. And it is sort of interesting. If you look carefully, you can see what he's saying. He's saying, today I am going to fix myself. So I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I have the feeling that Mark was the identified patient, which is why they came to the clinic, and that somehow he has the idea that he has to improve himself in some way, which is fine. So you can see how this picture might have been interpreted. For one thing, the mom and dad are over here hugging and kissing each other, which I suppose is a good sign, that this is a family where affectionate feelings can be displayed. The boy, Mark, is standing right next to his parents, which indicates he wants their attention, I suppose. In other words, I'm just giving you some ideas of how sometimes these drawings can be interpreted. In fact, I'll show you the official interpretation. Mark is 11 years old. He's the oldest child. Like I just said, he's drawn close to his parents. There's a box between him and the other siblings, and so on. So that's fine. In other words, the child has said, draw your whole family, draw them doing something. And so this is an example, a pretty straightforward example of how mental health professionals interpret these drawings made by children. I have another example of another book, which is much older. This is from the 1970s. And this book was originally published in Denmark and then later in Sweden. And this information was sent to me by one of our colleagues in Sweden, whose name is Jorn Sideval, who's a doctor in Sweden. And he's done research on parental alienation, and he happened to find this book, which is obviously very old. And it's interesting, this book is written by a child psychiatrist in Denmark named Gudrun Brun. And what's unusual about her is she was a woman who became a physician in, I guess, the 1930s or 40s, which was very unusual then for a woman to be able to go to medical school and become a physician and ultimately a psychiatrist and then ultimately a child psychiatrist. So she wrote this book about children and divorce, which is simply based on her own clinical activities over many years. And she has a number of little anecdotes in the book. And I'm going to show you an anecdote that she has, which sounds like what happens in parental alienation. I mean, that's kind of interesting because she's describing alienation in the 1970s, which was before it was ever identified officially and called parental alienation syndrome in 1985. So here's a woman who's an experienced child psychiatrist who's describing in a little vignette what happens in parental alienation. And here, take a look at this little story that I'm going to show you. So this is a story about this boy named Henrik, and his mother says negative things to him about his dad. And in the particular story that's told in the book. Um, there's an event that happened. There was a festival where the dad was participating in the festival, and he was taking the role of one of the kings of Denmark, whose name was Christian IV. And it was a big deal. He was riding a horse in the parade down the street, and the mom and Hendrik, little Hendrik, were in the crowd. It was a very big crowd, many people on the side of the street, and the dad was totally unable to see where they were. And the mom complained about it. The mom says to the boy, look, your father does not even say hello to you. In other words, here's the dad doing something really important in the community, and the mom is criticizing him to Henrik. And the boy catches on to this, and I guess later he draws this picture, which is a very negative picture of dad, and the name of it is The Father of the Horse. In other words, he draws that this has the father's head is in this picture, and it's attached to the body of the horse. In fact, that's what a centaur is a mythical being where the head is a human and the body is a horse. And so that's a kind of insulting image of the dad, especially when it's based on the dad doing something that is kind of important, which is being in this parade. Anyway, it's an interesting little story that was captured by this child psychiatrist in the 1970s. And it does illustrate a few things. That first of all, parental alienation has been identified for many, many years. It wasn't always called that, it didn't really have a name, but it really goes back in history. And secondly, this little story demonstrates how children can convey their feelings. I mean, this is a very vivid way for this child to convey a negative idea about dad, and it's prompted by things that the mom said to Henrik. And I think the child psychiatrist figured this out. I think she interviewed everybody, and she kind of put the pieces together, and she was able to understand how this whole thing happened. So I just wanted to give you some examples of how other people have studied the drawings of children, especially how the drawings relate to the families and what's happening in the families and how the people in the family relate to each other. So first of all, I want to show you some pictures that I have that come from regular families, from intact families that are, I guess you would simply say, are normal or typical. So let's start with that. We have several of these animations. I hope you like them. They're done by a colleague in New Jersey whose name is Larry DeMarco. And I appreciate his contributing these little animations to some as we introduce different topics during this webinar. So what these illustrate here are what I would basically describe as normal looking, typical, happy drawings by children before we get to the really disturbing ones of alienated children. So this is a Mother's Day card, and I'm going to show you the front and then the inside and then the back. And this is the front of the card that says, I love, and then you open the card and it says, you. And then it says on the right-hand side, dear mom, you are great, kind, and supportive to young me, is the child's name. Therefore, I want to give you back kind and supportive coupons. This is kind of a little thing that the child made up about coupons that the mother can turn in for certain rewards or behaviors by the child. And it says over here on the other side, boxy love. I'm not exactly sure what that means. but I guess it's something in the child's message to the mom. So anyway, I'm going to show you the back of the card, which explains how the mother can turn in her coupons. See, you can take a look at some of this. 30 Best Mom Awards. How do you log in? Boxy something, Boxy Potion. And then at the account, it explains how to log in so that the mom can get her rewards, her username and her password and so on. So anyway, the whole thing is kind of clever. And this was at a time when the boy had a perfectly good relationship to mom. Now it is sad that a few months later that this boy became alienated from his mother and he refused to communicate with her at all. So, you know, these stories sometimes turn very unhappy. But at the time of this card, it all looks normal and it's kind of cute. And the boy put a certain amount of effort into this, and you can see how he had affection for his mom. And so, okay, so I'm just using this as normal, typical type of artwork that a child might do. So here's another one that with a similar kind of story. This actually comes from Finland, so I can't really read all the writing here, but I gather that this was sent to me by this child's dad from Finland, and it says on it, "Daddy, the best dad in the world." And it, you know, this child put some effort into this, and you can see that this was a nice thing that the child made for her dad. And this also has a little bit of a sad story because this child became alienated a few months or I think a year later. And so it is kind of important to understand that these children in the beginning can do these little drawings and other things that would basically be interpreted as normal artwork with a normal relationship with the parent, but that later, a few months or a year later, the same child is alienated from the parent. So I just wanted to use this, you know, just some examples of what regular children look like. So I want to also talk about being estranged. So most people understand nowadays that being alienated means the child is refusing to have a relationship with the parent without a good reason. And you know, usually it's because the child has been indoctrinated or brainwashed by parent A to be afraid of or dislike parent B. So that's alienation. And that's different from estrangement. Estrangement is the child doesn't want to see a parent for a good reason. You know, that parent maybe was abusive or very neglectful or simply had very bad parenting skills. And so the child, for good reason, doesn't want to go visit that parent. Most people understand that difference. I think you understand that if you look those words up in the dictionary, they mean the same thing. Alienation and estrangement are frequently synonyms for each other. But in this setting, and in legal settings nowadays, most people understand this distinction between alienation and estrangement. And so I'm going to give you an example of a child who was estranged from both of his parents. In other words, I realize the topic for today are artwork by alienated children. But before I get there, I'm giving you some examples of other family situations. So I knew the background of this situation. And so I know that this boy was not alienated from his mom and dad, but he was estranged. And he had reason to not want to be with either his mom or his dad. And so he drew these two pictures. I'm going to show you the two pictures first, and then I'm going to go back and explain them a little bit better. So here's a picture that involves his mom. And this is a picture of a werewolf and a skeleton. And this is basically conveying his dislike for his mother. And this one is displaying his dislike for his dad. That this is a picture of a devil. You know, you got to admit, both of these pictures involved a certain amount of effort. I mean, this boy was only 8 years old, and both of the pictures have a certain amount of detail in them. And these pictures would be described as bizarre if you're trying to classify pictures. Now, let me explain how this comes about. You see these little line drawings? This is a little line drawing of mom, and then this is a little line drawing of dad. And this is part of a psychological test called the PORT, P-O-R-T, which stands for Perception of Relationship Test, which is a test developed by a psychologist in Philadelphia named Barry Bricklin. And in this test, which has been given thousands of times, and I've given it about 100 times to different children, you give them the piece of paper that has the outline drawing, the stick figure, and you say to the child, here's a picture, this is your mom. Now you put in a picture of yourself in this piece of paper. And then you give them this one and you say, this little stick figure is your dad, put yourself in this picture. And so you can interpret it, you know, the child draws a little picture of himself, and is he holding hands with the stick figure? Is he at distance? Is he interacting with the stick figure in some way? And so that's what, I'm trying to explain that these are not spontaneous pictures, but these are part of this test, the PORT test, that gets administered to children in custody evaluations. I have a feeling that this little boy might have misinterpreted the directions. In other words, what you'd say to the child is, put yourself in this picture. And it looks like he actually drew his mother. In other words, this werewolf, I have a feeling, is not intended to be himself. I have a feeling it's intended simply to be a picture of his mother. And that this devil, I have a feeling, is intended to be a picture of his dad. In other words, I think he misinterpreted the directions. But you know, for the purposes of this discussion right now, that doesn't really matter. I think what matters is he really had a reasons to have a dislike for his mom, and he really had reasons to have a dislike for his dad. And so I think that this represents a legitimate reason to dislike his mom and dad, and why I would call this estrangement. Now, I need to point out something here, is that I'm not making that diagnosis on the basis of these pictures. In other words, if you were simply shown these pictures, you wouldn't know whether this is estrangement or alienation, because the pictures simply convey that the child has a bad relationship with the parents. And in other words, when I'm during the course of this webinar, and if I say, oh, so-and-so is estranged or so-and-so is alienated, I'm not making a diagnosis on the basis of the picture. I already know that information. In other words, I know that information from an evaluation or from the history or from the parents, from some other source. And so I'm adopting the diagnosis that I know from other information. And then I'm able to say, well, here's two little pictures drawn by a child who we know was estranged from his parents. And it is interesting that the very same pictures could have been drawn by a child who's alienated from both of his parents. So you can't make the diagnosis simply on looking at a picture, but you can do it the other way around. That if you know the diagnosis of the child, that it helps you, the drawings help you understand what's going on in the child's mind. So this is a neat little example of estrangement. This child had a reason to dislike both mom and dad. Well, I've shown you a number of pictures, and I'm going to show you a number more. So people have studied pictures drawn by children, and they've classified them. Here's a paper that was written a couple of years ago from some people from Israel who studied the drawings made by children and teenagers. And there's actually a journal. You can see the name of this journal is The Arts in Psychotherapy. And there's been a lot of work, as you can imagine, on drawings made by children. And there have been attempts to how do you classify them? How do you evaluate them? How do you analyze them? And this article does have a method for describing or classifying some of these drawings. And this is the way it works. That they said there are 4 different types in general of drawings that children make of themselves. And one is called adequate or balanced, which basically are normal pictures that convey some sort of positive image, realistic image of the child. There's another category called detachment, in which the child conveys emptiness or loneliness about himself or herself. There's another category called intensity, which explains that if you look at the drawing, certain parts are done with a very strong component or an overemphasis of certain body parts, like the eyes are very prominent or the mouth is very prominent. And finally, there's a category called bizarre, like monsters or unusual aggression or unusual sexual images. And as we go through some of these pictures today, you can classify them by these categories. And what we just looked at, the little boy with the monster drawings of mom and dad and the devil drawing of dad, it comes under bizarre, unusually aggressive monsters. That if you were using this categorization, they would be classified as bizarre. And some of those other previous ones that we showed you would have been classified as adequate or balanced, that basically normal. And as we go through some of the pictures in a few minutes, you'll see some of them you can classify as detached, and some of them you can classify with intensity. So it is sort of interesting that this classification system that was published in this journal can be applied to the material that I'm showing you today. So let's go on to the next category. I haven't gotten to the alienated children yet, but here's, I'm working my way up to that. So the best situation when parents split up is that the child remains attached to both parents. In other words, parents might disagree, but the child says, well, I'm still going to get along with mom and I'm still going to get along with dad, and we'll hope for the best in the future. And that, of course, is the best outcome. That's what we hope for. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples that illustrate this. And in these examples, the parents were divorcing and there was conflict over time, but the child draws pictures that convey an attachment to both parents. So that's the best outcome. Let's see if we can figure that out. So here's one by a little girl. She's only 5 years old. And her parents were divorced and in conflict. Now, I'm giving you a little bit of history to some of these pictures. And in this particular case, I knew this because I evaluated the family. So I'm obviously summarizing what was going on in the family. And then I'm saying, well, how would a little girl draw her picture of her family in this situation? And this is a healthy way to do it. That the little girl's in the middle, and her dad's family is on one side, and her mom's family is on the other side, and they're smiling, and everybody's holding hands. And this is a very adaptive and a healthy way for this little girl to convey her relationship to both her mom and her dad. In fact, it's pretty vivid. And 5-year-old children, these people are drawn, of course, these are pretty good pictures drawn by a 5-year-old of people with body outline and faces and smiling and so on. So this is a good example of what we might hope for when parents split up. I have another example of this. So in this one, this is a different little girl, and the same thing, that the little girl is trying to stay on good terms with both her mom and her dad. And this drawing relates to her dad. And I have to try to read this with you. Let's see if we can read this. I love you, Daddy, and I know that you love me too. And I miss you so, and I know you miss me too. And there's a big heart, and then there's a child and the dad. So this is obviously the child conveying to dad that she has a relationship, and that she, that's nice. Of course it's nice. And, she also had, we know, got along with the mom. In other words, this was during the period of the divorce. Now, I don't really know what happened later. Maybe things did not turn out. Maybe the child became alienated at some point. But at this particular moment, this conveys that the child is trying to have a good relationship with dad. So here's another simple example by a different girl who's 12, and that they recently separated, and it's the same kind of thing. The picture is very positive. It has the name of the family, the Hamel house, and a rainbow. And rainbows generally convey a happy, optimistic feeling. And this little girl is trying to convey that she's optimistic for the future. And she's aware that mom and dad have split up. She's aware because they're now in two different places. But when she visits her dad in his new place, this is the picture she draws. And so that's fine. You might say that she's in a little bit of denial that her mom and dad have split up, and maybe that's common in very early stages when parents do split up. But it's also a reasonably healthy outlook, in that the child is attempting to have an optimistic outlook. So those are some examples of what I would call healthy outlooks on divorce. In other words, just to review this, here's the girl with the optimistic idea of her family, and here's the girl saying nice things about dad, and here's a little girl in the middle of dad's family. So these are all illustrate the child is attempting to maintain a good relationship with both parents. So that's a good thing. So here's the next category, is we're going to talk about that where the child has difficulty maintaining a good relationship with both parents. In other words, we're gradually going from a good adaptation to not so good to really impaired adaptation. And good adaptation is the child tries to have a good relationship with both mom and dad. Then the child has the loyalty conflicts, where the child is trying to have a good relationship with mom and dad, but it's very difficult, and you can see that there are problems. And then the next step is the child goes to one side and is alienated from the other side. So that's a progression in levels of severity. So what we're about to see are loyalty conflicts. So here's a kind of neat little story, that this is a boy who was 6, and he came to my office for an evaluation. And he drew this picture on the way to my office. In other words, his mom and dad were in huge conflict, and he was temporarily living with his aunt and uncle. And so actually his uncle brought him to my office. And on the way, they stopped at a restaurant and I had breakfast. I think that this was at a pancake pantry, I think. And the boy turned over the placemat, and while they were waiting for breakfast, he draws this picture. And then they bring it in and they give it to me when he comes for his appointment. And this is obviously a battle scene. I mean, this is a very detailed picture of a battle scene by a little kid, and there are warships, there are airplanes and this helicopter and missile launchers and a tank. And there's even this little first aid vehicle. I mean, it's amazing, some of the details in this. And with a little red cross on the ambulance. And he is, it's hard to say that, oh, it's obvious, but to me, it seems obvious that this child is thinking about the battle that's going on between his mom and his dad. And it really was a battle. It had been going on for more than a year. I mean, the kid's only 6 years old. So in his life, it's gone on for more than a year. It's gone to court. The kid has gone back and forth between the mom's household and dad's household, and now the uncle's household. So this child is clear that he is in the middle of a battle. And that's why I would say that he is experiencing a loyalty conflict. Why? Well, for one thing, he isn't sure which side to be on. Now, in this particular thing, they brought this was drawn in the restaurant, but they brought it to my office. And so this little boy tried to explain this to me. And he actually inserted himself in this battle, that he put himself in this airplane in the center. And so, which is on the side of one of the parents. It really doesn't matter whether it was the mom or the dad's side. I mean, the point is simply that the child is caught in the middle. And in this particular moment, he is on one of the sides of one of the parents. Now, I know that he wasn't alienated from anybody. In other words, he was happy being with dad. He was happy being with mom. So he wasn't alienated, but he was caught in the middle. And at times he felt he had to be on a side. But the most prominent feature of this drawing is the child's awareness of this huge battle that's going on. And that's why I would say he's exhibiting loyalty conflict. So in my appointment with him, we talk about different things, and which, the mom's household and the dad's household, and currently he's staying with the aunt and uncle. And so, so all that was kind of interesting. But at the end, we're kind of wrapping up, and he asked me if he can draw another picture. And, what do I say? I say, well, of course. Yeah, you want to draw a picture? Let's do it. And so he draws a picture, which I'm about to show you. This is the same boy, of course, and he draws this little detailed picture of a battle. And as he's drawing it, he says, my favorite thing, it's a war. I mean, this is an amazingly detailed, precise manifestation of being caught in the middle of a battle, not just a battle, but a war. And there's this cute little airplane, and here's some kind of battleship. In fact, if you look at it, the battleship has a little helicopter at the top of it, and then it has guns that are going off, and it's shooting at the enemy. So what's all this mean? And in other words, I mean, for a little boy, this is a remarkably precise picture of a little piece of warfare that he's put effort into, and he really has a way of grasping visually what's happening in his life. And so I think this is a really good example of a loyalty conflict. In other words, the boy actually still managed to get along with both his mom and his dad, even though he was aware of a battle going on, and that it obviously occupied his thinking and his feelings to be able to draw these pictures and spontaneously. In other words, nobody asked him to draw a picture of a battle. This is what he drew himself and that he called his favorite thing. It's a war. So that's a pretty, I think that's a pretty amazing example of a child caught in the middle of a battle. So I have another one. So what we're talking now, we're not yet talking about alienation, we're talking about loyalty conflict. So here's another example of the same thing. And so I know a little bit about the history here, that this also seems to represent a loyalty conflict, because I know that the parents had been in conflict for years, that the child generally was still going back and forth. And the child apparently was struggling to have a good relationship with both mom and dad. But that's hard. At least that's kind of the general information I have. And so this is a nice picture. I'm not sure what exactly, whether this child is drawing a picture of herself or simply a picture of a lady, but she's very dressed up and she's happy looking. And this is obviously a very positive picture by this little girl. And here's another one. This is the same kind of thing, that this is a very positive picture. There's a rainbow again that we've already had, and another picture, and hearts and so on. So here's another interesting picture from about the same time. So this is a Mother's Day card, and it's very, that she drew, and it's very unusual. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. The child says, "Top secret," for Mother's Day. And I don't know exactly what's going on here, but the child apparently is wishing her mom a happy Mother's Day secretly. In other words, that she seems to be conveying the idea that she can't let dad know that she is wishing mom a happy Mother's Day. So, I don't want to read too much into this, but that seems to be what's happening, and that this child is struggling to have a good relationship with mom and with dad, as far as I can tell. But, I don't want to read too much into these pictures, but that seems to be what's happening here. So here's the same girl, and there developed a time when dad prevented the girl from having parenting time with mom. And here's a picture that she drew during that time. And it's kind of poignant. It's a picture of a child who's looking out of a window. We don't know what's going on exactly or what she's thinking, but she seems to be looking for something or hoping to go somewhere or missing somebody. And so, the implication, if we know the history, is that she's in dad's household, but she's kind of wishing that she could see her mom. And obviously I'm speculating a little bit when I say that, but that's based on the information that we have about her situation. And here's another picture by the same girl. You have to kind of look at this a minute to see what's going on. But we have this little girl with the balloons, and at the bottom is "Let your dreams take you away." And this is the same kind of thing, that it's a child who's perhaps unhappy or unfulfilled in some way, and she's hoping that things will get better. She's hoping that her dreams will lead to some kind of better situation. So, I guess I would try to interpret these things in a general way, and that this seemed to be a situation where the child was going back and forth, generally was going back and forth, and had a relationship with both mom and dad, but she was struggling with it, and it was hard to maintain a relationship with both mom and dad. So at least that's generally how I would interpret this. So what I want to do is move on to pictures of children who are alienated. So, we've gone from sort of more or less normal children to children who are in a divorce situation, but are successfully staying attached to both parents, to children who are in a divorce situation and are struggling with having a relationship with both mom and dad. So those are the loyalty conflicts. And now we're moving on to alienation, where it's a divorce situation and the child solves it by gravitating to one parent and rejecting the other parent. So let's see what happens here. So we're going to start with mild, and I'm going to show you examples of mild, moderate, severe. So let's make sure that everybody has the same understanding of the definitions for mild, moderate, and severe. So what is mild parental alienation? I think these definitions are going to sound familiar with the people who are watching this webinar, because these definitions are as simple as you can get. We try to make them so you can put them in action, or they can be operationalized easily. So in mild, the child says, I don't want to go see the other parent, but the child goes and is fine. In other words, suppose the child is alienated from dad. The child says, I don't want to go see dad. But as soon as the child gets in dad's car and they drive off and they go to dad's house, the child is fine. They get along, they have a good time, and so on. And then the child goes back to mom at the end of the parenting time. So the child started out by saying, I don't want to go see dad, but it turned out fine. In moderate, the child says, I don't want to go see dad, for example, and they go and they're difficult. In other words, they continue to be oppositional. They are negative. They're hard to get along with. But there are moments when they're fine, that they soften up and they do have dinner and they do go to the movies together. They engage in some game. And so even though they're predominantly oppositional during the parenting time, it's not total. And it goes back and forth. And there are times when they do get along. So the people who describe this have a little bit of sense of hopefulness, because there are moments when they have their good relationship with the child, even though there are times when they're very negative. That's moderate alienation. Severe alienation, the child says, I don't want to go see the other parent, and won't go, and hasn't gone for months or sometimes a year, simply because of extremely strong refusal. And if the child does go, the child is negative during the entire parenting time. For instance, the child might stay in her room for the whole weekend, keep the dad out of the room. She might bring her own food so that she doesn't have to eat dad's food. She'll get on her phone and spend all day long talking on the phone to her mom as a way to avoid a relationship with dad. So those are examples of severe parental alienation. So you have to kind of have a sense of mild, moderate, and severe as we proceed to look at some of these pictures. And by the way, I mentioned this before, and I'm going to say this again at the end. As we go through these, I'm sure you might think of whether this has happened in your own family. And if you do have pictures, that even if you're an alienated parent or grandparent, you might have pictures that the child has drawn. And sometimes the pictures were sent to you, or the child literally hands them to you as a message of some kind, or sometimes they're simply left over that the child might have them at your house, and when they leave the picture at your house, or you might find them in some other context. So if you want to participate, I'm going to continue with this project. So write down my email address, and if you want to participate, or if you want to discuss any of this, get in touch with me. So it's my name, William.Bernet. You have to spell Bernet right, Bernet, at VUMC.org. VUMC stands for Vanderbilt University Medical Center .org. So let's start with mild parental alienation. So this is a little bit of before and after. In other words, here's a really sweet picture when the child, 13-year-old, had a good relationship with dad. And in the picture, there's this little child touching noses with dad. And it says on it, if you can try to read it, it says, "To dad, love." That little scribble there says love, and then there's a comma, and then the child, I think, put her name at kind of as a signature. So this is kind of sweet. I would interpret this as being a well done little picture, and it obviously conveys a time when the two of them were doing fine. Well, the next picture is a couple of years later, and it's somewhat distressing. So this is the same child a couple of years later, and it's my understanding that she had started to become alienated. And this is a picture of herself, and the name of it is "I'm Ugly." So this is a somewhat unhappy picture. It's not extremely disturbing, but it's somewhat unhappy. And if you remember the category I said, sometimes you can categorize these pictures. And one of the categories was detached. And I think that this would be a good example of a self-portrait of a person who's detached. And so I'm not diagnosing parental alienation on the basis of this picture. What I'm saying is the history that I have from the parent is that at this point in time, the child was starting to be alienated. And so I would classify this as mild as best I can. And this appears to be conveying that the child is starting to have some psychological issues. So here's another example that appears to be early alienation. So this is kind of a neat drawing. This is by a little boy who's 9. And in this picture, you can see that there's a storm going on. And there's lightning, and there are all these raindrops. And I'll tell you right now that when I see raindrops like this, I think of tears, because I've seen other pictures of children, young children, who clearly were depressed and unhappy, and they would put raindrops in the picture, that it was clear from these pictures that the raindrops in the child's mind somehow were associated with teardrops. So the little boy himself is over here on the right-hand side, and then there's a house, and then there's this funny line going up. And I'm about to show you the boy's description of what's happening here, and we can read this together. So this is what the boy is saying. "I'm running home scared and frightened. I'm feeling very alone and sad that the beautiful day turned into a roaring storm." So that message was not written by the boy. I think what happened is the message, I think, was written by the school teacher. In other words, I think this is one of these things where the children are asked to draw a picture of some kind in school, and then the teacher says, "Oh, tell me what's happening in this picture," and then the teacher writes down, sort of takes notes and writes down the child's description, because this little boy is not capable of writing down this exact little sentence. But I'm pretty sure the teacher wrote down what the boy said. And of course, there's a very powerful statement that this child is having issues about his home and his mom and his dad, and so on. And that's what that little funny line is. See the little squiggle at the bottom in the center, and then the line is going up. I think that's, he's conveying running home. And then over next to it, I think, is the top of his head, the top of somebody watching. So I think those are two eyeballs and the top of the head. So some of it's a little bit hard to understand. But I think the overall theme is he's experiencing something unpleasant. And now it's my understanding from the history provided by the mother that this period of time was the beginning of when he became alienated, which is why I'm calling this mild parental alienation. But I think that's the best explanation for this picture. So here's another example of mild parental alienation. This is a little bit hard to read, so I'm going to have to explain this to you. So this is a wall. It looks like it's a wallboard or something. And the child has used some sort of instrument to scratch this message. And if you look at it, the message says, "I hate," and it says H-A-T, and there's an E at the very end. Oh, or maybe the E is in the next line, I guess, H-A-T-E. And then it says P-P. P-P is her mother's maiden name, her initials of her mother's maiden name. And the girl's saying, "I hate P-P." Now, all I know about the history is that 2 or 3 weeks prior to this, the girl was fine, that she and her mom had good relation, and with the dad, I think she was doing fine. And I guess she was going back and forth. And suddenly the child is developing this animosity toward mom. And so I don't really know the details of what's going on in her mind, but this is at the very beginning of being alienated. And so, I'm classifying this as early just because it's only 2 or 3 weeks old. And so I guess I would generally call this mild, although I'm not really sure exactly. So this same girl wrote something else, which is here. So this is on a blackboard in the mother's household. And if you read what this says, she's saying, "I hate," and then she has her sister's name. And then she says, "That person's my sister's female parent," which is her mother. In other words, this girl is saying, "I hate my mother," or our mother. And so this was also about the same period of time. And this is, this is very negative. I mean, it's sort of obvious here that this child is saying something very, very negative about her mom. I mean, which is, unless there's some really good reason to be saying that, this is obviously very abnormal. And if it's correct that this is at the beginning of a parental alienation process, that what's going on in the child's mind is that she's starting to get polarized, or she's starting to engage in splitting, which is the mental state that characterizes parental alienation, especially in more severe cases. And in splitting, the child is saying one parent is good and the other parent is bad. And she's, in her mind, she's starting to gravitate to that. And she's starting to say, my mother, I hate. And of course, I mean, obviously that's a very disturbing message, but what's going on? I mean, you have to kind of think about what's going on in the child's mind, that's what she is thinking about. And that's pretty disturbing. And it obviously, if that is happening, it makes you wonder what's going to happen next. So anyway, these things that I've shown you here, in my mind, I'm classified as mild. You know, we can go back real quick. We had this girl who draws a picture of herself, and she seems to have a bad opinion of herself. And then this little boy with the storm, and then this girl who only recently was fine, and now suddenly she's saying she hates her parent. So I'm classifying these as early parental alienation or mild, you know, because just in terms of the history, this seems to be an early stage of what later progressed to something more severe. So let's move on. That was mild. Now we're going to talk about moderate level of parental alienation. And so this is sort of interesting. I have a couple of examples here. And both of these are by children who seem to be talented in terms of art. And I think they both convey something that is mildly disturbing in what they are drawing, but their artwork is so good, it's a little bit hard to figure out exactly what's going on. But here, this is a very nicely done, this is what's called a linoleum block print. And this little girl does this at school, and she apparently, you know, this is pretty skillful for a little child to create this kind of artwork. And my understanding is this was when she was having a good relationship with both her mom and her dad, age 9. So here, a couple of years later, what's happening here? That the history that I have is that she is alienated during this period of time, but she's still going back and forth. And if you look at this, you'll recognize this as looking a little bit like paintings that were done by Picasso, Pablo Picasso. You know, he did these paintings where he had different perspectives on a body or on a face at the same time, that he might show the front and the side or some other perspective. And so I think it's my understanding that this child had learned about Picasso, and she's imitating his style in this picture that she's doing. But this picture is a little bit disturbing as to, you know, what's going on here. That there appear to be two different contrasting moods. That face on the blue face seems happy, though the yellow side of the face looks disturbed or distraught in some way, or unhappy, or maybe angry, with the teeth so prominent, and the hair is red, and so on. So she appears to be conveying that she has different mental ideas that are in conflict, that she's being torn perhaps between two parents. And I don't want to interpret this too much, but I just think generally this kind of drawing seems to be consistent with a child who's having conflict in her mind, perhaps conflict regarding her parents. Now, I want to emphasize that I'm not diagnosing moderate parental alienation on the basis of this picture. That's the history that I have from the parent who provided this to me. And so I'm just saying, well, here's a picture that's interesting by a child who apparently has moderate parental alienation. And it's a very well done picture, but it appears to be conveying sort of a split mind, um, which is consistent with being caught and divided between two parents. So here's another example which seems to reflect um, moderate, and this is also done by a boy who actually is really, really good artist. So this is sort of interesting. So the information I have from the parent is that this was drawn when the boy was moderately alienated, and that's the history. In other words, I'll repeat this endlessly, that I'm not diagnosing that on the basis of the picture, but all I can say is that's the information I have. And so I say, well, here's a picture that was apparently drawn by a boy who was moderately alienated. And it's also very well done. And he studied art. He apparently had classes, not just in school, but outside of school. But what's going on here? I mean, here's a bonfire, which looks like it's in a forest. And to me, this is conveying something, that it's conveying a very strong feeling. I mean, these fires, this big fire suggests a very strong feeling inside of him of some kind, whether anger or fearfulness or a sense of danger, because it looks like the bonfire is about to get out of control and to start a fire in the forest. And, you know, there are these trees. The bonfire is surrounded by trees, but the bonfire is still contained in this one area, but it looks like there's a danger that it's going to get out of control. So, you know, I don't want to make too big a deal out of this, but I think that is a reasonable interpretation. And, you know, both of these are drawn by kids who are really good artists, but I think they convey a feeling that's going on. And I'm not much of an art critic, but I'm just saying that it's interesting that if they are experiencing moderate alienation, that these pictures are pretty vivid illustrations. Now, also, I'll point out there's nothing odd about these pictures. They're not bizarre. They're not pathological. I think they're just interesting, that they seem to be conveying a strong feeling of some sort of conflict, internal mental conflict, you know, but, you know, that's just a little bit of speculation. So I'm going to move on to kids that, in my mind, are manifesting severe parental alienation. So we're going to move on. And I do have to warn you a little bit that these drawings I'm about to show you are by children who, as far as I can tell, were experiencing a severe level of parental alienation. And I'm got to warn you that some of these pictures are pretty disturbing. They're unhappy. They're violent. I would have to classify them as abnormal, because the feelings that they convey simply are not the feelings or concerns or the opinions of typical children. And so I know that some of you are going to find these to be difficult to look at, and I don't want to upset you, but I want to remind you the purpose of this. I kind of have a scientific purpose to collecting these pictures, which is I want to be able to show with data, with hard data, that these children have a mental condition that is abnormal. And the extremely violent images of their parents is simply not what any normal child would convey. And so that's why we're collecting these. And, you know, be careful as you watch them. Um, I don't want you to get too personalized by these, but that is what we're trying to collect and trying to convey, that we have kind of a scientific purpose of this. And we hope to use these pictures in writings and publishing articles about parental alienation and book chapters and in testimony and in lectures. We hope to use these pictures as a way to prove the reality that parental alienation is a mental disorder, that these children have an abnormal way of thinking, which is really, really sad. Anyway, let's show you some of these. So this first one is kind of interesting because the child who's drawing the picture himself isn't alienated. But this is really unusual. See, the child who's drawing the picture is this little boy on the left-hand side, and it says me, with his own dad and mom. And he is aware that his older brother and sister are alienated from mom. In other words, this is a child who's only 8, who's describing parental alienation as occurring in his family. And everybody in the picture, almost everybody, is unhappy. And in his own family, his real dad and his real mom have this storm going on, and it's another storm and raindrops coming down. And he in the middle is his brother and sister, who are his half siblings by his mother. And then over on the right-hand side, it says their real dad. So it looks like the brother and sister are aligned with their dad, and that they're having trouble in their relationship with their mom, who's in this storm and the raindrops. And frankly, I've never seen a picture like this, where a child is drawing a picture of what's happening with his siblings or his half siblings that seem to be conveying parental alienation in them. But the child himself is not being alienated. So this seems like a really unusual picture that is pretty poignant idea that the child is able to describe what's happening in his family in this way. Well, I'm going to show you several examples of before and after. In other words, I'm going to show you something that was done before the alienation, and then what happens as the child becomes alienated. So here's a little girl who draws what is a perfectly happy, I guess you would call, normal picture when she has a good relationship with her mother. And over here on the left-hand side, it says to mom with, actually, I'm not sure what this says, something done, has a year was done or something. Anyway, it looks like a happy picture. And then there's a picture of mom and a picture of the child, and it says love on it. So that's okay. So here's another one. Happy picture. I love you, mom, and so on. So this is the typical sort of affectionate picture between the child and the mother. But I have to tell you, things took a bad course, and I'm about to show you the same thing from a couple of years later, which is very, very sad. And so this is what the child wrote later when she became alienated. And we can read this together. She says, "Go away, you don't belong in this world or house." And then the other one says, "No one has loved you, no one ever would or has loved you." So what a message. I mean, this is a very painful message that a child might write to the parent that's now being rejected. And I mean, this simply doesn't make sense. I mean, this is an everyday, even a child with conditions or conflicts at home, or what you might call a relational problem, which is kind of an official diagnosis, wouldn't say something like this: no one has loved you, no one ever would. I mean, this is an abnormal message, sad message that a child might send to a parent. So this next one is even stronger. And let's read this one together. So here's when it's normal. This is a little girl to her dad, and it's kind of sweet. Dear Dad, there is only one person in the world to be my daddy, and that is you. Love you, loads, loads, and so on. And there's hearts and kisses at the bottom. And I think it's kind of cute. See, in front of the word you, it says drum roll, please, which is kind of a nice touch, that this child is really conveying that that she has a wonderful kind of sweet relationship with dad. So that's neat. That's wonderful. Well, and the next picture is a few months later, and it is very, very disturbing. I realize I've been giving you all kind of a warning, but the next picture, I mean, in your mind, compare this, which is really happy and really strong, positive feelings, and the next picture is really, really negative. And so this is what it looks like. Here's the same little girl, and you can see she's holding a sword, which is bloody, and she's saying, unsincerely, me. And there she is. And the dad has been decapitated. That this little girl has murdered the dad by cutting off his head. And she's saying, you, head unattached. Now, there's no way that a picture like this would ever be considered somehow adaptive or normal for a child to draw this kind of thing. And I think, sadly, this really illustrates that these children have a distorted, almost a delusional perception of the parent in such negative terms. I don't want to be too negative about this, because I think these children are treatable. In other words, I don't want to get in today to the whole kind of interventions, but even children like this, I think, are treatable if you take the right steps. But in the meantime, they're in a very painful mental condition. Some of you may know where this comes from. There's a organization in the United Kingdom called Good Egg Safety, and they have done a lot of work on educating the public about parental alienation. And they've done some research projects, and one of their publications has these two pictures. In other words, this one and also this one. And so I got in touch with them, and they gave me permission to use these pictures as an educational little vignette that I can use. So I appreciate that donation from the Good Age Safety Organization. So that's an example of before alienation and now severely alienated. So here's another example. So this is kind of sweet. This is an acrostic, meaning on the left-hand side are the letters for the word mother, M-O-T-H-E-R. And each letter has a little sentence having to do with mother. Mother M makes squishy yellow sponge cake, and so on. Orders broccoli. H has an I love mom shirt, and so on. So this is a nice little thing. The girl, my understanding, was about 10. And, I'm not sure how, it obviously it's conveying a kind of sweet attitude of the child toward her mom. Well, I'm about to show you something from several years later. Actually, there's a big gap here. Here she's 10, and the next thing happens when she's 18. And at 18, of course, she's free to come or go, to have parenting time, to not have parenting time. And I'm about to show you what amounts to an email. This is actually a cut and paste from an email message that she sends to her mom at age 18 saying, I never want to see you again. In other words, so she goes from this really nice, positive, warm feeling to something very, very negative. So here, let's look at this email. Same girl. Let's read this together. I am now 18 and therefore a legal adult and am foregoing any further contact with you unless absolutely necessary. This decision has been influenced only by my interactions with you and your behavior throughout my life. If you need more specific reasons as to why I'm ending my relationship with you, please refer to the affidavits and conclusions from the most recent court orders, and please stop trying to contacting me. So this is very, very sad. And based on the information I have, she's severely alienated in the sense that, as far as I know, she has a very negative perception of mom, which is not based on reality, but it's based on this delusion that somehow one parent is totally good and one parent is totally evil. And as you know, one of the features of parental alienation is what's called the independent thinker phenomenon, which is when the child says, hold on, nobody's told me to say these things. These are my own ideas. And the child says that spontaneously. So that's actually in this little note to her mom. She says, this decision has been influenced only by my interactions with you. And so that's an example of what we call an independent thinker phenomenon, at least it appears to be. I mean, I don't know this girl, I haven't evaluated her, but the general information I have is that she went from being a good relationship with mom to being severely alienated. And so, that's a pretty sad situation. So here's another one that's before and after. And this actually relates to the child's aunt. And I'm going to show you in the beginning, she appears to have a really sweet relationship with the aunt. And I think what this says at the top, she puts the aunt's name, and then she says, she is amazing. I think that's what that is supposed to say at the top. And then I'm not sure what this yellow thing is, but I mean, it seems like a pretty picture. Oh, maybe it's a sun, because at the top, you can see those yellow lines coming off, which is the way children do sun rays. So maybe this is a very nice, friendly sunshine. And she's saying, my aunt is amazing. And the next one's kind of similar. My aunt is my shield. And here's a picture, kind of a nice picture of a shield. In other words, it's conveying that my aunt, is protective, supports me, and so on. So these are two pictures that seem very nice relationship to the aunt. Well, I'm about to show you a message that's very, very negative, which I think is only a short time later. And I have to warn you, this is a text message, from a telephone, from a cell phone. And it's kind of painful to look at, but this is what it says. So at the top is what the aunt is saying. Sorry, missed your call. Bring me again if you need to. Love you. And then what the child texts back are these horrible remarks. Poo, fuck. You're a hippopotamus. Fuck, and so on. At the bottom, I'm not sure exactly what this means, but it seems to be saying at the end, give me all your money or I'll break your spine. So, I mean, these are very painful, negative messages between the child and the aunt. And I mean, I gather from this material that previously the child had a perfectly normal, loving relationship with the aunt. And as you know, what happens in alienation is the child rejects the parent, but also rejects the parent's extended family. So in this case, the aunt is presumably the sister of the parent. In other words, it's the child is rejecting the extended family of the rejected parent. And so it's a pretty good example of going from a positive relationship to a negative one. So I'm going to show you another example of severe alienation. And this is a picture drawn by a 9-year-old girl. And the information we have is that this was during a time when she was alienated. And the children's name, has a picture of herself and her sibling. And the children's names have been removed with PowerPoint. In other words, see where it says N, mean N, that's the child, that's the girl who's drawing the picture. And then her sibling is R, where it says useless R. I'm not sure what their actual names were, but in the picture she's saying comment to R from N. So we removed the actual names. And she's saying, you are a stupid little idiot that is helpless. So whatever, the information we have is that the child was severely alienated from the parent, and she's saying very, very negative things about her family situation. And I'm about to show you another picture by the same girl, which is a picture of herself. And it's a very, very negative picture. I know I'm keep giving you these warnings, but I think that you need to kind of prepare yourself that this same little 9-year-old girl draws a picture of herself that is extremely unhappy. And here it is. So in this picture, she's saying, I hate my life. And she says, this is me. And this is a very distorted picture. And if you recall, we were classifying some of these pictures. And this would be classified bizarre because this is so creepy. And this is such a negative. I mean, if you were doing an evaluation of a child, and in the course of the evaluation, the child drew a picture like this, I mean, the evaluator would be really, really concerned about the safety of the child because she looks so unhappy and it's so unclear as to what might happen next. So these are examples of severe parental alienation. Well, I have a couple more. The next one is kind of interesting. And that in this example, I'm going to show you the progression from no alienation to mild, moderate, severe. In other words, pictures all by the same child as the child goes through these stages. So let's walk through this. So the beginning is normal. She seems to have, age 7, she seems to have a good relationship with both mom and dad. And here's a little something she drew. I love my mom and dad and my whole family. Me and my sister are best friends, BFFs, best friends forever. It's fun to love. I mean, that's an amazing positive comment about her family. And she draws a picture of herself and her mom and her dad. And then it looks like that's her sister. And the sister has been sort of blacked out a little bit, so I'm not exactly sure. But I think she's de-emphasizing the picture the sister, and she's emphasizing herself and her mom and her dad. Obviously, this is a kind of a happy family. And here's another one. Incidentally, see, this is in a little notebook that she had, or a little, these are a collection of drawings that she had and that she had saved. And actually, this looks like it's on computer paper that's been made into a little notebook that she was using. And here's another message from a notebook. So let's read this, but it seems to be a happy message involving her dad. And what it says is, my dad left. He loves me because he left 2 letters. One says, I love you, and XOXO. The other letter says, Daddy kissy you. When he comes home, I'm going to jump in his arms and Mom's arms. So in this time of her life, she's expressing affection for both her mom and her dad. Well, that's fine. But as time goes on, in this notebook, problems develop. And let's see what happens next. Well, this is still fine. This is something she drew to Daddy from so-and-so. I love you. And obviously, this is a very happy picture between herself and her dad. So this is something from her notebook. And here you can see that problems are starting. This is actually a year or so later. Hello, dear Mommy. Today I'm putting away the dishes and helping Dean. Me and my sister are playing. School, not fun. Gotta go, love you, bye. So what's going on here? So she's starting to convey kind of a negative feeling about Dad. In other words, she refers to her dad by his first name, which is a lack of respect. And usually that happens when the alienating parent starts referring to the dad by his first name. And she complains about helping Dad. She complains about spending time with her sister. And this is a little message to Mom. Now, what we know is that this message was in her notebook or in her scrapbook. And we know that she never actually sent this message, that she had no way to send this message. She didn't have a cell phone or anything. That these are simply thoughts that she's writing down in her scrapbook. And so this seems to be, she obviously still is in both Mom and Dad's household, but this seems to be the beginning of negative feelings toward Dad. So let's see what happens next. She writes another picture. I knew something horrible would be in my life. And there she is, very sad. And then her name is at the bottom, and that's been blacked out. So this is another, what it appears to be during the early stages of alienation, because she's still going back and forth, but she's saying negative things about being in Dad's household. And we don't know specifics, but that seems to be what's going on. So the next one I've interpreted as moderate, because in this, she's in Dad's household, but she's actively calculating how long it's going to be that she can go back to Mom's house. And we can read some of this on the left-hand side. She's counting the days in August, and she says, I want to go home. And then she says, when I get home to Mom's house, I will hug Mom and give her a great big kiss. And then she says, at home, at Mom's, my room is clean. I always keep it that way. So she's writing in her scrapbook negative things about being at Dad's house and positive things about being at Mom's house. In other words, something's going on, which I would call moderate, because it sounds like there are times, it sounds like there are times when things are okay at Dad's house, but she really doesn't want to be there. On the right-hand side, she's counting down the days: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 4, 3, 2, 1 night. And then she says, time to go home. So to me, she is in both houses, but she's having very, very negative feelings about being at dad's house. So I call that moderate alienation. Same thing here. This is kind of interesting. I'm going to have to explain this to her. I'm going to have to explain this to you. That she's creating a scheme of getting sent back to mom's house by pretending to be sick. It really is a fascinating and elaborate scheme that she put in this notebook or in this scrapbook. And on the left-hand drawing is an outline, a floor plan of her home, dad's home. And she doesn't have dad's name, but she refers to her dad as him. And you can see at the top it says him's office. And then there's an X and she says him. So that seems to be referencing her dad. And then at the bottom, she says, this is my plan, that I'm sick and I'm choking and I'm coughing. And she says, fake cough. And she describes her plan to converse with daddy and say, daddy, I'm sick. And I'm not sure what this means, but she says, daddy says, do you want gravel? I'm not sure what that means. And she says, no, I want to go to mom's. And daddy says, okay, do you want me to take you? And then she says, yeah. And daddy says, okay. And this is a plan. In fact, it says plan number 4. And so she's developing these fake reasons to get daddy to take her to mom's house. So, we've never done an evaluation. We don't have all the details. But this seems to convey that things are unhappy, and at least in her mind, are unhappy at dad's house. So what happens next is severe. And what happens next is pretty disturbing. Once again, I have to warn you that what comes up next is pretty sad. Well, actually, this is still moderate. This is she saying, I want to go home. And now her sister gets involved. And her sister says, me want to go home. I miss mom, and so on. So the sister has older handwriting. So it looks like both daughters, both girls are saying, I don't want to be at dad's house. I want to go home. Well, anyway, this is the sad part. And I think this is severe. And you can see when I read, let's read this little story that she wrote in her scrapbook. This story is called He and She and the Kids. She had the kids. She gave the kids to him. The kids didn't want to go. He gave the kids back. She had the kids. She gave the kids to he. The next day, he took the kids. He got shot by a tank. The kids lived happily ever after with she. The end. This is really, really strange. I mean, here's a little girl who goes through the trouble to write this little story that involves her dad being killed in a violent manner. I mean, there's no way to interpret this as some sort of version of normal. I mean, for a child to have this kind of fantasy and then to go to the trouble to write it down is really, really disturbing. And I have to tell you what comes next. There's the pictures. This little story has pictures that go with this little short story, and they're also disturbing. Here's a picture of the next page, which says army people, and then something about attack. Go to the attack. And there's a picture of two military vehicles. And then I'll give you a close-up of this is the military vehicle of the tank. She said that the dad gets shot by a tank, and here's the tank shooting and killing, I guess presumably killing the dad. And so, this child is, as I said, going to a lot of trouble to convey this extreme violent fantasy, which is very sad. So here's another story, somewhat similar, which involves 3 siblings all having the same violent fantasy. And here's some positive. So first of all, we have the children saying something positive about mom. Here's a nice picture of mom. Here's another thing about mom. To mom, happy Mother's Day. Love you, have a good time, and so on. And that these messages come from 3 different children. I'm not going to go through exactly the names of the children, but here's a happy message. And here's another nice message to mom. I hope you get well soon and come back home. I love you. Or no, she says lots of love from so-and-so and so on. And here's another similar message, but it's actually different handwriting and it's from a different child. So here's a somewhat similar message. Mom, I love you. Get well soon and come home. And then it is actually from 2 other children. So there are 3 children here saying happy things about mom. But this takes a turn for the worse. And now the children say really, really negative things. This is a little bit hard to see, but this was written, I think, on maybe a blackboard or on some sort of writing. And then this was the picture of it taken on a cell phone. And what this says, I'm going to read some of this for you. It's a little difficult to read, but in the center, it says ways we can kill. And then it says off a cliff, drown the person, shoot the person, knife. Here, these are different ways. There's a ghost here, different ways that I think the ghost is saying ways we can kill somebody. And in the next one, it's somewhat another message. So angry, I can kill. So, so these are little scraps of information. We don't have the whole story, but they're little scraps of information that these 3 children are all conveying the same message. And finally, here's another one that kind of explains it a little bit. That their mother got engaged to a man named Patrick. And this is what one of them is saying. R.I.P. Patrick's head off. Ugly man can't look after himself without lady like his mom or my mom. In other words, the children are saying they don't want mom to marry somebody named Patrick. And then they're saying 10 out of 10, I hate him. And then there's a picture of the child shooting and killing Patrick. So, I mean, once again, I'll say this again. Violent fantasies like this are very, very abnormal. And they help to convey the mental state of these children. So, here's one more way to look at this. So these are some text messages between a dad and a son. So this is a 10-year-old, an 11-year-old boy. And the dad is saying in the blue, it's hard to hear that from you. Oh, see at the very, very top, the son says, fuck you. And then the dad is trying really, really hard to be pleasant. It's hard to hear that from you. It makes me sad. I love you so much. And I'm looking forward to our adventure together. And then the son is saying, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. So, it's hard to think of an 11-year-old boy saying something like that, but here's some more. The child is saying, get out of my life, you suck. And then the dad is trying really, really hard to be pleasant, good morning, I love you, and I miss you, and so on. So that's one example of a boy who's 11. Here's the same boy saying, you suck, and these are emojis that are very negative. You're like this to me, and all these negative emojis. So that's the 11-year-old. Here's another child who's 14, who's sending text messages to a dad. You're the worst person ever. You're an idiot. Stupid. I hate you. You sick. I'm not sure, that might be a misprint. He might have meant to say you suck. So anyway, these are 2 different boys, 11 and 14. And these are really abnormal messages that are being sent. So y'all sent in a few questions, and I'm going to try to address a couple of them. So one question was, how should you be with alienated kids during the visit when they refuse? Well, that, many people wonder about that. And I can only, in this talk, I can only mention in a very general way, that it's it's not always any way you can find, but the general principles are to try to be positive, try to create something that's enjoyable or that's fun, try to interact in some sort of positive way, and try really hard not to get into an argument with the child. And I'm sure there's other strategies, but those are the general principles. And somebody wrote in a question specifically about artwork, would sending an alienated adult child some of their artwork from prior to alienation assist them in remembering their previously close relationship? Well, that's an idea, and it might be if you have them. If you do send it, I think you send it in a very neutral way. You should say, oh, Jimmy, look at this. I happened to come across something that you drew when you were 10 years old. It's so sweet. And here, it made me think of you, and here, you might want to look at this. In other words, don't try to get into an argument over it, but just send in a very neutral way. Now, actually, some therapists use this. You probably are familiar with Linda Gottlieb, and she has a program called Turning Points for Family. And she uses pictures, mainly photographs and videos from the past, to help the child go back and recreate good times with the parents. Let me show you one other topic. These are, everything I've shown you so far are children. And here I want to show you things done by the children who are grown up. And this first one is an older child. She's almost 18. And this is from an art class and an art show at high school. And this is a beautifully done. And you can see this child has really good talent to draw this picture of it looks like a child standing on some sort of gate. In other words, this might be, how you have a gate on a stairway, and that's what this looks like. In other words, it looks like the child is in a little bit of danger trying to climb over or standing on this gate that's protecting the child from something that there's a drop off on the other side. So what does this mean? I mean, here's a child who we know is alienated from a parent. And what's, she's trying to convey here in this beautiful way that this child has a danger. Well, this next one is by the same girl, and this is a very disturbing picture. And in other words, it's unclear exactly what's going on here. But this clearly is a very unhappy situation that's being conveyed. Well, there's another picture by the same girl. And this is an example, I said that one of the features of children's drawings is intensity. And if you look at this, the mouth and those lines in the face and the eyes seem to be more intense than they need to be, but it's still a beautifully drawn picture. Well, this is not a normal picture. And I'm going to give you a close-up. If you look at the eyes, I'm about to show you a close-up of the eyes. So look at this. See what it says? In her eyes, it says, help me. So that's what this says, except you can't really see it very well. And then it says, help me. So what do you make of this? I mean, here's a girl who's drawing this. She's displaying this at an art show at her high school. And it's just sad that she seems to be conveying something about her life. Here's another painting that's done by an adult who had been an alienated child. And this is by a psychologist named Petra Dita. She's the artist, and she let us show this picture. And she's trying to convey here what it was like being an alienated child. And the name of this is Broken. And you can kind of see the bottom part looks like there's broken glass. And then the top part is broken in a certain way. So that's kind of a beautiful but sad picture of what it was like growing up, being alienated from one of her parents. Here's one more painting by a mother who's alienated from her children. This is also a beautiful painting by a professional artist whose name is Joji Zhang. And this is a painting of her children that she's alienated from them. So I got to tell you, this has been a difficult topic. This is something to think about. Yeah, I want to show you a few pictures that are really kind of neat. Here's a child, little girl who drew this picture of a cow, which looks really content. And this was part of her school art contest, which she won. So that's kind of neat. I gather that this child at some point became alienated from one of her parents, but this picture is a really, really positive, kind of nice picture. It's kind of happy. Here's another one of a little boy who drew this at school, and the assignment was draw a picture of something happy. And at the top, it says, hello, happiness, bonjour, bonheur in French. Hello, happiness. And this is like a boat trip. And at the bottom on the boat, it says island tour. You know, like you can take the boat on kind of a recreational boat trip. So that's sort of neat. It's nicely done. There's a lot of effort put into this. And it's a pretty happy picture. Here's one more picture of a happy child. Here's a little girl who drew her family. And I know that the little girl is the figure in the center, and her dad is on one side and her mom is on the other side. In other words, she's depicting herself as holding hands with both her mom and her dad. Well, I hope you enjoyed this discussion. I'll mention again, the little animations were done by Larry DeMarco, who's an attorney in New Jersey, and his office is called the Law Center, and you can contact him if you want to. And I also want to mention that this is this organization that I'm the president of, the Parental Alienation Study Group, and if you're interested, you can join the PASG, and you simply go to this website, www.pasg.info. And finally, like I said before, that if you want to participate in this project, send me an email and we will work it out. So I can stop this screen share, and then it's just me. Here I am. And so I really want to thank you for your attention today. I appreciate your thoughtfulness and your attendance at this webinar. I hope you found it helpful. And if you do want to participate, you know, you have my email and you can get in touch with me. Thank you, and take care of yourself.